So this is one of the books that I have at my house that I just found in a local bookstore, and I just really like it. And the name of the book is Learn to Ink in 50 Experiments, Marker Workshop. There on the bottom there you can see it's by Sasha Prude, and she's the author of A Watercolor Workshop. So even though that says Watercolor Workshop, we're actually going to be working with markers, or you can use anything in your house as long as it's making a mark. So like ink pens work really well with this, any type of marker that you have, felt tip pens, all of those are great things to be able to use in order to make your mark. Here in the book, I actually am going to flip towards this page, and it talks about like different things that you can do with markers in order to create different marks. And you can see like the way that they're arranged, you're almost getting like different types of what we would be calling values. So this first one up here by where it says 1, this one talks about like hatching using straight lines. So hatching is one of the more basic of the mark making techniques. It's simply a series of straight lines next to each other, and then just be sure to consider the amount of space between each line. Once you have mastered hatching, then talk about, other things that you can do with that and how you can layer those types of lines to create, a different feel for things. So I just had an old sketchbook laying around, and I just kind of set it up into different parts. That way, as I talk to you about these, we can kind of go over them as well. Now, I just used a cup to kind of trace little circles and stuff. You can use what you have, but I just want to be able to have some space here that shows, how the technique is done, and then also using it on a shape to kind of make it into a little bit more of a 3D form. So when we talk about hatching, it's basically just like making little marks. So if you take, and I've got a set of markers here, kind of fine line pens at my house. So hatching is just basically using straight lines, little marks. Okay. Now the further that you put these apart, the lighter your color is going to appear. The closer that you put these together, so if I do the same thing, I'm just going to move them a little bit closer together, you're going to create a little bit of a darker tone to them, a darker variation. So you can see these ones are spaced a little bit further apart, these ones are put closer together. This one's going to appear lighter, whereas this one's going to appear darker. Now, to apply that, as far as creating something like that for an object or a shape, okay, so I just used a basic circle, and to be able to create this more into like a sphere, which would be the 3D component of the circle, you would start by wherever you want your shadow to be, wherever you want it to be darker, and gonna start filling in those lines with those hatch marks. Okay, now these ones are a little bit far apart to be considered a shadow or shading on this shape, but to kind of just get a basic layout to make them appear darker, I can just go back in and I can add more lines closer together in between those lines I've already established. So just going in, adding more of those lines is going to make it appear darker. Now, to make this circle look like a sphere using this hatching, okay, I gotta be able to show that this is dark, then we're going to get a medium, then we're going to get light, and then get even lighter, and then leave this part up here with the white. To be able to show that with hatching, okay, on my next row, I'm going to space my lines out a little bit further apart, and because a circle is round, it's not like a flat object, I'm going to have to follow that curve when I make these marks. Okay, then I'm just going to go add in some extra lines in between those lines I've already put down. Not as much as what I did in the first step, but if I left them without those lines, it wouldn't be the right tone to show that. Okay? And then just keep moving on and up and around the circle. So again, start off with some spaced in lines. Now you can always add lines, but because I'm working with marker, you can't really erase them. And you should be able to start to see a change in the tone, or like the change in the color. Okay, so I have like my really dark. It's getting a little bit lighter. It's getting even more lighter. And then to create that other light tone, again, I'm going to space these out a little bit further and just keep working around my circle until eventually we have like this little white spot. So you can see I have like my darkest hatching. It gets a little bit lighter, even more light. If I really wanted to go back in, space these lines out a little bit more to create that illusion of that lighter color. And then eventually where the light is hitting it is going to remain white. So that one is hatching. Okay. Another that you can add to that is what is known as cross hatching, which is essentially the same thing. You start off with the same thing, but then you go back in and you cross them. And same thing, if you want it to look much darker, you can go in, put those lines closer together. If you want them to appear lighter in tone, then you're going to space them more apart. So then I go from like my lightest, my medium range, and then what would be considered my darkest. The more color you put on the page and the closer together that you form these lines, the darker things are going to be. So there you have hatching, and then you have the cross hatching. Okay. Another thing that you can do to kind of create different things out of your basic markers or lines is what is known as contouring or curved lines. Contouring is similar to hatching, but instead of these being straight lines, you'll use curved lines. So these lines should kind of follow the same path, and they'll eventually be used to create 3D textures and compositions. So it's similar to hatching, but instead of doing straight lines now, we're going to be working with curved lines. So here on my little practice sheet here, I'm going to switch colors on you. So I did blue, let's try orange this time. So for contouring, at this point, instead of doing straight lines like what we did here, we're going to do more curved lines. Okay, this has more of a scribble look to it. But again, the more distance you put between them, the lighter the color is going to appear. The more that you put these lines tighter together, the darker that color is going to appear. So more of a darker range, more of a lighter range. These lines are pretty close together. These ones are a little bit further apart. So if we go again to our circle design, turning our circle into a sphere, what's going to happen is I'm going to keep kind of like the same, imagine the same light sources coming in. So this is going to be my darker ranges. Then I'm going to start to get lighter and lighter as I move to the top left hand side of the circle. So for contouring, I'm going to start with like basically these little S shapes. These little S curves. I'm just going to follow along the curve of my circle. Again, you can always add more and add more lines on top of lines. You can't necessarily take them away, at least not with the marker or the pen that I'm using. Okay, so to really show a difference between which one's going to be lighter and which one's going to be dark, and I want this to be dark because it's furthest away from what I would consider my light source, I'm really going to go back in and layer these S lines on top of these S lines that I've already drawn. And I feel like this one should curve up a little bit more. Okay, and then again, just like we did for the hatching, when you move up to like the lighter layer, again, going to do that same type of line, that same S curve, those same contour lines. Just kind of get them laid out there first. Follow the initial shape. Okay, maybe go back in and fill in some more lines in between. Not too many, because that is going to make this part of the shadow darker, and we don't want that. We want a little bit of a difference between this darker part and then doing a little bit lighter. And then continue to work your way up. Remember, keep that curve. These ones are contour lines, so they're going to be like little S's. Now, as we work our way up to our light source, we're going to space these even further apart. Okay, so that one is more for the contour lines. Another technique that you can use is what is known as scribbling, or what they mention in the book as wiggly lines, which is this one here, number 3. Scribbling is about creating less deliberate line art. This can be anything from a loose, wavy series of lines to tightly packed, wiggly balls of ink. These types of markers are useful when you want to develop more organic textures with a composition. Okay, so if I go back to my little practice page here, and we're going to use a different color again. Let's use pink. So these are kind of similar to the contour lines that we did up here, but they're not going to be as more like S curves. It's going to be just more like scribbles. Okay, so I'm going to take you back to when you was like 3 or 4 years old and, you know, was learning how to use crayons for the first time. So just doing basic line shapes, the more you overlap them, the darker that these ones are going to be. And I'm just constantly moving my pen across the paper. More like little infinity signs, I guess, if that's something you need to use as a reference. And then again, as I move up towards my light source, I'm going to like space these out a little bit more. So we almost got like figure 8s or infinity signs, however you want to look at it. And just kind of keep going along, up along there. And then our next layer, just space them out a little bit more. And then eventually, as you move towards your light source, you're going to get more space in between and less marks. Okay, so that would be more of the scribbling. The last one here is known as stippling, or basically dots, or You know, a lot of artists have used this in the past as what is known as pointillism. So stippling is simply dotting your marker onto the page to create small circular marks. These marks can be loosely applied to add like freckles to a face, or they can be tightly packed to represent sand on the beach. Of all the techniques, this is the most visually specific, and it can be quite time intensive. Okay, so when you were doing this one, if I go back to my little practice page here, again, let me get a different color. Let's do green for stippling. You are basically applying little dots, and yes, I said dots, to the page. The more dots you put in a concentrated area, the darker your colors are going to appear. So this one is time intensive, like what they said. So to kind of give you a basic run through, darker tones, you are doing dots really close together. Okay, so basically just pressing your marker or your pen, whatever it is you're using to make your mark, to the page, doing it around in the same area. The more you apply those dots, the darker that area is going to appear. And because you're doing dot by dot by dot by dot, this one takes the longest time. So that is more of a darker tone. A lighter tone, or actually we'll go with medium tone, then I'll show you lighter. You can kind of see like you're going to space the dots out a little bit more. And I'm going to have a little bit fewer dots than what I did here. So I have dark, that would be considered my medium. To do a lighter kind of tone in all of this, you're still going to do dots, but we're going to space them out. So you can see from dark to medium to a lighter value. And we would apply that same concept to creating our sphere by creating that shading. So zoom out again. Even though this one is not done, you can kind of see like hatching, contouring, and then scribbling to create different types of values. So have fun. You know, try this at home. Like I said, you can do this with the ink pen. You can do this with markers. If you've got a large enough drawing space, you can even do this with like crayons. But try it. Let me know what you think. And then if you do finish a project with these techniques, email me a picture. I will talk to you guys later. Stay healthy and stay safe.